It started simply. A rival gang leader walked into Wells's restaurant, crossed the room without hesitation, and stopped at Bumpy Johnson's table. No warning, no negotiation, no attempt at diplomacy. He looked Bumpy in the face, insulted him loudly enough for the entire room to hear, and then did the one thing no man in Harlem was ever supposed to do. He leaned forward and spat directly into Bumpy Johnson's food. What happened next took less than 4 minutes. No gunshots, no chaos, no shouting, just methodical, controlled retaliation that would be repeated in Harlem for the next 50 years, not as gossip, but as instruction. Because that night wasn't remembered as a fight. It was remembered as a demonstration. Wells's restaurant occupied a corner on 7th Avenue between 132nd and 133rd Streets, a location that made it visible from multiple directions and accessible from different streets, practical considerations that mattered to men whose survival depended on awareness of entrances, exits, and potential threats. The restaurant had operated since 1932, surviving the Depression through loyal customers who valued not just the food, but the understanding that certain conversations happened there without being overheard or reported. Marcus Wells, the owner, understood that his establishment's real value wasn't just the roast chicken and collard greens. It was the discretion, the neutrality, the assurance that business could be conducted without interference. Bumpy Johnson ate there 3 or 4 times weekly. Always the same table, corner booth, back to the wall, clear view of both entrances. This wasn't paranoia. This was wisdom earned through decades of navigating environments where threats emerged from people who smiled at you one moment and tried to eliminate you the next. Tuesday, March 23, 1948, started like any other evening. Bumpy arrived at 7:30, wearing a well-tailored gray suit that announced success without ostentation. He ordered his usual, roast chicken, collard greens, cornbread, coffee. Settled in with the evening newspaper, reading about Truman's latest policy announcements and the ongoing tensions in Europe that everyone knew would define the next decade. The restaurant was moderately busy. 36 people, a number that would later become significant for different reasons, scattered across tables, conversations at normal volumes, the ambient sound of silverware on plates, coffee being poured, the occasional laugh, normal, unremarkable, until Ulysses Rollins walked through the door. Ulysses Rollins, the man with more ambition than sense. Rollins was 34 years old, originally from Georgia in Harlem since the early 1940s. He'd found work in various operations, numbers running, enforcement for mid-level operators, nothing particularly successful. But Rollins had ambition, wanted respect, wanted recognition, wanted people to treat him like someone important rather than just another worker executing other people's instructions. The problem? Rollins hadn't earned that respect, hadn't built anything, hadn't demonstrated the intelligence or capability that made men successful in Harlem's economy, hadn't proven himself worthy of what he demanded. What Rollins possessed, instead, was resentment, specifically toward men like Bumpy Johnson, who commanded the respect Rollins wanted but couldn't achieve. That resentment had been building for months, fed by every slight, real or imagined, every time someone showed Bumpy deference that Rollins believed he deserved, every reminder that he was nobody while Bumpy was somebody. By March 1948, Rollins was working for Curtis Williams, a mid-level operator who ran small operations in territories where Bumpy didn't maintain strong presence. Williams and Bumpy had competitive but managed relationship. Both understood that direct conflict would be expensive and unnecessary when territories could be divided and respected, but Rollins apparently didn't share Williams's strategic caution. Or perhaps Rollins believed that publicly challenging Bumpy would elevate his own reputation, would prove he was brave enough to confront Harlem's king. Either way, when Rollins entered Wells' restaurant that evening and saw Bumpy sitting alone reading his newspaper, something in Rollins's mind decided, "This is my moment. This is when I prove I'm not afraid. This is when I show everyone that Bumpy Johnson can be challenged." It was the worst decision Rollins would ever make. The disrespect, 7:42 p.m. Rollins walked directly to Bumpy's table, didn't approach cautiously or respectfully, walked with aggressive confidence, his body language announcing confrontation before he'd spoken a single word. Bumpy looked up from his newspaper, recognized Rollins immediately, knew who he worked for, knew his reputation as someone with more mouth than sense. His expression remained neutral. "Rollins," Bumpy acknowledged. "Simple, nothing more." "Bumpy Johnson." Rollins's tone was loud, aggressive, designed to attract attention from nearby tables, which was clearly his intention. "Can I help you with something?" "Yeah. You can stop acting like you own Harlem, like you're some kind of king, like the rest of us are supposed to bow down whenever you walk past." Conversations at nearby tables stopped. 36 people, workers ending their shifts, couples having dinner, business associates conducting quiet discussions, all turned to watch. Everyone understood immediately that something significant was happening. Bumpy put down his newspaper with deliberate care. His movements were controlled, showing no anger despite Rollins's obvious attempt to provoke exactly that reaction. "I don't act like I own anything," Bumpy said quietly. "I conduct my business. If you have a problem with how I operate, we can discuss it. But not here. Not now. I'm eating. Come see me tomorrow if there's something specific to address." "You're eating?" Rollins laughed, theatrical, performative, making sure everyone heard. "You're sitting here like you don't have a care in the world, like you're not worried about people who might challenge you, who might be tired of your act." Bumpy's expression didn't change. "Rollins, you're making a scene. Whatever point you're trying to make, this isn't the way to make it. Walk away. We'll talk tomorrow." But Rollins wasn't interested in talking tomorrow. Rollins wanted his moment now, wanted everyone watching to see him stand up to the legendary Bumpy Johnson without backing down. "I'm not walking away," Rollins said, leaning closer to Bumpy's table. "I'm tired of people like you thinking you're untouchable, thinking you can—" Then Rollins made the mistake that would cost him his eye and mark his body 36 times. He spit into Bumpy's food, deliberately, with obvious intent, making sure everyone in the restaurant saw the act of ultimate disrespect, contaminating a man's meal in public, treating him like he was beneath consideration, challenging him in the most insulting way possible. The restaurant went absolutely silent. 36 witnesses held their breath, and Bumpy Johnson's face showed something nobody had seen there before, not anger, not rage, but cold calculation about what needed to happen next. The response. Part 1. Inside, 7:43 p.m. Bumpy sat perfectly still for approximately 3 seconds, looked at his plate, at the food he'd been about to eat, now ruined by Rollins's deliberate disrespect, looked back up at Rollins. His eyes were completely calm, empty, the kind of empty that scared people who understood what it meant. "You should leave now," Bumpy said, voice quiet, perfectly controlled. "While you still can." "Or what?" Rollins challenged, his confidence now wavering slightly as he recognized something in Bumpy's expression that suggested he'd badly miscalculated. "What are you going to do, old man?" Bumpy stood up, slowly, deliberately reached into his jacket pocket. Rollins tensed, expecting a firearm, but what Bumpy withdrew was different, a straight razor, the kind barbers used, the kind that men in Harlem carried for practical purposes, shaving, grooming, and occasionally for purposes that had nothing to do with personal hygiene. The blade caught the restaurant's light, as Bumpy unfolded it with practiced ease. "We're going outside," Bumpy said. His voice carried no emotion, just statement of fact. "You wanted everyone's attention. You got it. Now everyone's going to watch what happens when you disrespect someone who's earned respect through decades of maintaining it." Rollins started backing away. "Wait! I didn't mean we can talk about this. Too late for talking. You made your choice when you spit in my food. Now you live with the consequences." Bumpy walked toward Rollins, not rushing, not aggressive, just walking. But everyone watching understood this was worse than rushing. This was controlled intent. This was someone who had decided what needed to happen and who would make it happen, regardless of anything Rollins said or did now. Rollins backed toward the door. Bumpy followed. The entire restaurant watched in silence. Marcus Wells, the owner, made no move to intervene, made no move to call police, just watched, understanding that this was something beyond his authority to stop, something that had to play out according to codes that existed outside official law. The response, Part 2, outside, 7:45 p.m. Rollins backed out the restaurant's front door onto 7th Avenue. Bumpy followed him into the evening air. It was still light outside. March evenings in New York stayed bright until nearly 8 p.m., which meant that what was about to happen wouldn't be hidden by darkness, would be visible to anyone walking past, would be witnessed by people inside the restaurant looking through the front windows, would be public, memorable, permanent. Rollins tried one more time. "Bumpy, listen, I was out of line. I apologize. We can settle this without—" "Yes, we were out of line," Bumpy interrupted. "And yes, we're going to settle this, but not the way you're hoping." Then Bumpy moved. Fast, precise. Someone who'd been in physical confrontations his entire life and who knew exactly how to use a blade effectively. The first strike took Rollins's left eye. Bumpy's blade moved across Rollins's face in a controlled arc that caught the eye itself, destroying it instantly. Rollins screamed, a sound of shock and pain and sudden understanding that this wasn't going to be a warning or a minor correction, but something far worse. Rollins brought his hands up to his destroyed eye. Bumpy used that opening to deliver the second mark across Rollins's raised forearm, opening a line that would scar permanently. "You wanted attention," Bumpy said, his voice still calm despite the violence he was delivering. "Everyone's watching now. Everyone's going to remember this, going to remember what happened when you forgot that respect is earned and must be maintained." Rollins tried to fight back, threw a wild punch that Bumpy avoided easily. Bumpy responded with the third mark, across Rollins's shoulder, the fourth across his chest, the fifth his other arm as he tried desperately to defend himself. The blade moved methodically, not frantically, not with rage or loss of control, with surgical precision. Each strike deliberate, each mark placed to be visible, to be permanent, to serve as reminder. Sixth mark, seventh, eighth. Rollins fell to his knees. His face was a ruin, one eye destroyed, the other eye squeezed shut against pain and terror, his mouth open in screams that had stopped making sound, just gasping breaths between sobs. Bumpy continued. Ninth mark across Rollins's back as he tried to curl into protective position. 10th across his leg. 11th, 12th, 13th in rapid succession as Bumpy worked with the focused attention of someone completing necessary task. People walking on 7th Avenue stopped, watched. Nobody intervened. Nobody called for police. They just stood there, bearing witness, understanding they were seeing something significant, something that would be discussed for years. Inside the restaurant, all 36 people watched through the windows. Some wanted to look away. None did. They understood they were witnesses to history, to a moment that defined how power and respect actually worked in their community. 14th mark, 15th, 16th. Bumpy paused. You understand now? You understand what it costs to disrespect someone publicly? To think you can challenge authority without consequences? Rollins couldn't speak, could only sob and bleed and wish he'd made different choices. Bumpy continued. 17th mark, 18th, 19th, each strike measured, each mark deliberate. The number climbed. 20, 25, 30. By the 31st mark, Rollins was barely conscious. By the 34th, he was lying flat on the sidewalk, unable to move, his body a canvas of permanent reminders. Bumpy delivered the 35th mark across Rollins's face, a line that would scar from forehead to chin, bisecting the destroyed eye socket, ensuring that anyone who saw Rollins's face would know immediately what had happened to him and why. The 36th and final mark went across Rollins's throat. Not deep enough to threaten his life, Bumpy wasn't trying to end him, just mark him. Just ensure that every breath Rollins took for the rest of his life would be reminder of this moment. Then Bumpy stopped, folded the razor with the same practiced ease he'd unfolded it, placed it back in his jacket pocket, looked down at Rollins' broken, marked body with an expression that showed neither satisfaction nor regret, just acknowledgement that a necessary task had been completed. Bumpy turned to the crowd that had gathered, maybe 20 people now on the street, plus the 36th, inside, watching through the windows. This man disrespected me publicly, Bumpy said, loud enough for everyone to hear. He spit in my food in front of witnesses. He challenged authority he hadn't earned the right to challenge. This is what happens when you forget that respect must be maintained, when you think you can violate fundamental codes without consequences. Remember what you've seen. Tell others. Make sure everyone understands that there are lines you don't cross. Then Bumpy walked back into Wells's restaurant, walked to his table, sat down, gestured to Marcus Wells. My meal was contaminated, Bumpy said calmly. I'd like to order fresh food, same as before, and bring me clean silverware. The aftermath. Immediate, 7:52 p.m., 8:30 p.m. Someone, nobody ever admitted who, called for medical assistance. An ambulance arrived at 8:15 p.m. Medical personnel found Rollins still lying on the sidewalk where Bumpy had left him, barely conscious, extensive injuries across his entire body. One eye completely destroyed, loss of significant fluids, in severe shock. They loaded him into the ambulance, transported him to Harlem Hospital. The medical personnel who treated him documented what they found. 36 distinct wounds across face, arms, torso, legs, and back. Left eye destroyed beyond any possibility of repair. Multiple injuries requiring extensive suturing, significant trauma. Recovery would take months and would never be complete. Police arrived at Wells' restaurant at 8:20 p.m. They interviewed Marcus Wells first. What happened here? The officer asked. A man fell outside, Wells said. Clumsy. Very unfortunate. A man fell and somehow lost an eye and sustained 36 wounds. I was in the kitchen, didn't see exactly what happened. You'd have to ask the people who were in the dining room. The police interviewed the 36 people who'd been inside the restaurant. Every single one provided the same response with minor variations. I didn't see. What happened? I was looking at my food. I heard commotion but didn't look up. I don't know anything about it. 36 witnesses. Zero cooperation. The police understood immediately what this meant. Whatever had happened involved someone the community protected, someone whose actions they wouldn't testify against, regardless of what they'd seen. The officers tried harder, pressed witnesses, pointed out that someone had been seriously injured, explained that this was serious crime, requiring serious investigation. The responses didn't change. "I didn't see anything. I can't help you. I don't know what happened." One officer, more perceptive than the others, asked Marcus Wells directly, "Was Bumpy Johnson involved in this?" Wells looked at the officer with an expression of mild confusion. "Bumpy Johnson? He was here having dinner. I don't know what you're implying, but Mr. Johnson is a customer who comes here to eat, same as anyone else. If something happened outside, I'm sure it had nothing to do with anyone inside my establishment." The police knew they were being stonewalled, but without witnesses willing to provide statements, without physical evidence linking anyone to Rollins's injuries, without even the victim likely to cooperate when he regained consciousness, there was no case to pursue. They filed a report, listed it as assault with unidentified perpetrator. Closed the investigation 3 days later when Rollins refused to provide any information about who had caused his injuries or what had provoked the incident. The hospital, Rollins's recovery, March 24th, April 15th, 1948. Rollins spent 3 weeks in Harlem Hospital. The first week was critical. Doctors monitored him constantly for complications, infection, shock, internal injuries beyond the obvious external ones. His destroyed eye was removed completely. The socket was cleaned and bandaged. He was told he'd wear a patch for the rest of his life. The 36 wounds were cleaned, sutured, bandaged. Some required multiple procedures. All would scar permanently. His face would never look the same. His body would carry reminders forever. During the second week, when Rollins was conscious and able to speak, police visited him. "Mr. Rollins, we need you to tell us what happened. Who did this to you? We can protect you if you cooperate with our investigation." Rollins looked at the officers with his remaining eye, understood something they apparently didn't, that there was no protection police could provide that would matter if he testified against Bumpy Johnson, that cooperating with law enforcement would make him a permanent target, would ensure he never felt safe anywhere in any community with connections to Harlem. "I fell," Rollins said. "Clumsy accident. Nobody did this to me. It was my own fault." "Mr. Rollins, you didn't fall. Someone attacked you with a blade, multiple times, destroyed your eye. This wasn't an accident." "That's my statement. I fell. If you're suggesting something else, you're wrong. I have nothing more to say." The police tried for 2 more days. Rollins refused to change his statement. Eventually, they gave up, understanding that whatever had actually happened, the victim wasn't going to cooperate with investigation. During the 3rd week, Rollins received a visitor. Curtis Williams, the operator Rollins worked for, came to the hospital. "Rollins, I need to understand what happened, why you confronted Bumpy Johnson, why you thought that was a smart decision." Rollins, his face still heavily bandaged, his missing eye socket covered with gauze, looked at Williams with shame and regret. I thought I could prove something, thought I could challenge him without consequences, thought people would respect me for standing up to him." "And now?" Williams asked. "Now I understand that some men can't be challenged, that some respect is real and enforced, that I made the worst mistake of my life." Williams nodded. "Bumpy contacted me, said that what happened to you was between you and him, that it doesn't affect our business relationship, that as long as I make sure my people understand the lesson you learned, we can continue operating without conflict." "What lesson?" Rollins asked bitterly. "That I'm a fool? That I destroyed my life for nothing?" "The lesson," Williams said quietly, "is that respect isn't something you can challenge just because you want recognition, that there are men who've earned their position through decades of maintaining it, that crossing them publicly means accepting public consequences. You learned that lesson the hardest way possible. Make sure it wasn't completely wasted. Make sure you remember it for whatever life you have left." Rollins was released from the hospital on April 15, 1948. He left Harlem the next day, never returned. Why 36 witnesses said nothing. The silence of the 36 witnesses became as legendary as the incident itself. Police couldn't understand it initially. How could 36 people watch something happen and all claim they saw nothing? How could that many witnesses be that unanimous in their refusal to cooperate? But people in Harlem understood perfectly. The silence wasn't about fear alone, though fear was certainly part of it. The silence was about multiple factors that combined to create absolute wall of non-cooperation. Respect. For Bumpy. The 36 witnesses included people who'd known Bumpy for years, who'd benefited from his presence in the community, who understood that he maintained order in ways that official law enforcement never had and never would. They weren't going to testify against someone who'd earned their respect through decades of treating people fairly and maintaining boundaries that kept everyone safer. Code. Against informing. Harlem operated under codes that existed outside official law. One of the strongest codes: you don't inform on community members to outside authorities. You don't cooperate with police. You don't provide testimony that sends neighbors to prison. Violating that code meant being marked as informant, meant being unsafe in your own community, meant losing the relationships and protections that made life livable. Understanding of context. Everyone who witnessed what happened understood the context. They'd seen Rollins disrespect Bumpy publicly. They understood that Bumpy's response, while severe, was answer to provocation that couldn't be tolerated. They believed, rightly or wrongly, that Rollins had earned what happened to him, that this was justice operating through informal mechanisms rather than official legal systems. Fear of consequences. Yes, fear mattered too. People understood that testifying against Bumpy Johnson would make them targets. Not necessarily for violence. Bumpy didn't need to threaten witnesses, but for social consequences, for being marked as untrustworthy, for losing the goodwill and protection that came from being known as someone who respected community codes. Solidarity. In a broader sense, the 36 witnesses were demonstrating solidarity with their community against outside authority that had never protected them, never served them, never treated them fairly. Refusing to cooperate with police was statement about power, about who had real authority in Harlem and who didn't. So they stayed silent. All 36. Not because they'd coordinated beforehand or because Bumpy had threatened them, but because they understood implicitly what the situation required, what their community expected, what their own survival and social position demanded. That silence protected Bumpy from prosecution, but it also became statement about community power, about codes that existed outside official law, about respect and authority that couldn't be granted by badges or courtrooms, but had to be earned through decades of maintaining it. The street legend, how the story spread. Within 24 hours, everyone in Harlem knew what had happened at Wells's restaurant. The story spread through barbershops, corner conversations, social clubs, anywhere people gathered and talked. And like all stories that get told and retold, it developed variations, embellishments, details that might or might not have been accurate, but that served the narrative purpose of making the lesson clear and memorable. Some versions emphasize the number 36 times, one mark for every witness. Bumpy made sure the count matched so everyone would remember their part in what happened. Other versions emphasize the eye, took his eye first, made sure Rollins would spend rest of his life seeing the world differently, made sure everyone who looked at Rollins' face would know what happened when you disrespect a king. Still other versions focused on Bumpy's calmness, didn't raise his voice, didn't show anger, just did what needed to be done with the same calm he'd used to eat dinner. That's real power, being able to deliver consequences without emotion, without losing control. The story became teaching tool. Older people told it to younger people to explain how respect actually worked, how authority was maintained, how boundaries were enforced in communities where official law provided no protection and often created more problems than it solved. Remember what happened to Rollins, parents told their children. Remember that disrespecting people who've earned respect carries consequences, not because those people are cruel or violent, but because respect is how we maintain order, how we keep our community functional, how we survive in a world that doesn't protect us through official systems. The story also became test. How someone told it revealed what they believed about justice, respect, and community power. People who emphasized Bumpy's brutality were usually outsiders or people who didn't understand Harlem's codes. They told the story as evidence of lawlessness, of violence, of criminal behavior that should be condemned and punished. People who emphasized Rollins's provocation were usually insiders who understood context. They told the story as evidence of justice, of appropriate response to public disrespect, of boundaries being maintained in necessary ways. People who emphasized the 36 witnesses were usually making point about community solidarity, about codes that transcended official law, about power that existed outside courtrooms and police stations. All these versions coexisted. All of them were told and retold. And all of them contributed to the legend that made the Wells Restaurant incident one of the defining stories about Bumpy Johnson and about how power actually functioned in Harlem during that era. What happened to Ulysses Rollins the rest of his life? Rollins left New York in April 1948 and never returned. Various accounts place him in different cities over the subsequent years: Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Atlanta. He apparently moved frequently, never staying anywhere long enough to establish permanent roots, never building anything resembling the life he'd had before that March evening. People who claim to have encountered Rollins in various cities over the years described a broken man, someone who worked menial jobs, who kept to himself, who wore a hatch over his missing eye and long sleeves even in summer to hide the scars on his arms, someone who, when asked about his scars, would claim they were from an accident and would change the subject immediately, unwilling or unable to discuss what had actually happened. One account from Philadelphia in 1956 describes Rollins working as night porter at a train station. A person who'd known him in Harlem recognized him despite the patch, despite the scars, despite the 8 years that had passed. "Rollins, that you?" Rollins looked terrified. "No, wrong person. I'm not from New York, never been there. Come on, I know it's you. What happened to—" "I said, I'm not who you think I am. Leave me alone." The person didn't press further. Let Rollins disappear back into whatever anonymity he'd built for himself. Let him maintain whatever fiction he'd created about who he was and where he'd come from. Another account from 1963 places Rollins in Atlanta, working as janitor for an office building. Same pattern, solitary, quiet, refusing to discuss his past or acknowledge his origins. Rollins apparently died sometime in the late 1960s or early 1970s. The exact date and circumstances are unknown. He likely died alone, in whatever city he'd ended up in, with whatever identity he'd claimed. No obituary ever mentioned his real name or his connection to Harlem, or what had happened at Wells's restaurant in March 1948. He'd wanted to be someone important, wanted respect, wanted recognition. Instead, he became cautionary tale. Anonymous broken man, living reminder that some challenges carry consequences you can never escape, never overcome, never outlive. Why Bumpy did it, the deeper reason. Years later, when asked by people he trusted about the Wells restaurant incident, Bumpy would occasionally explain his reasoning. Rollins thought that disrespecting me was about just us, him and me, two men having conflict. He didn't understand that respect is structural, that it's not personal preference, but necessary mechanism for maintaining order in communities where official law doesn't protect us. If I'd let Rollins spit in my food and walk away, what message would that send? That Bumpy Johnson can be disrespected publicly without consequences. That the respect I'd maintained for decades could be challenged by anyone with enough courage or stupidity to try? Within a week, I'd have faced 10 more challenges. Within a month, my authority would be undermined completely. Not because I'm not tough enough to handle challenges, but because authority that doesn't enforce its own boundaries isn't authority at all. It's just temporary power waiting to be taken by whoever challenges it successfully. So I responded, not because I enjoyed it, not because I'm cruel, but because maintaining respect requires demonstrating that violations carry certain consequences, that some lines can't be crossed without immediate, severe public correction. The 36 marks weren't random number. They represented the 36 witnesses, one mark for each person who watched Rollins disrespect me, one reminder for each person who needed to understand what happens when you forget that respect is real and must be maintained. The I was specific message, too. Rollins wanted everyone to see him challenge me, so I made sure everyone who ever looked at him would see what happened when that challenge failed, would see permanently what temporary bravery costs when it's directed at someone who's earned their position through decades of maintaining it. Do I regret it? No. Would I do it differently? No. Some situations require responses that aren't moderate or measured. They require demonstrations that are severe enough to prevent repetition, public enough to educate everyone who witnesses them, permanent enough to be remembered for generations. That's what happened at Wells's that evening. Not personal revenge, structural maintenance, boundary enforcement, necessary response to violation that couldn't be tolerated without undermining everything I'd built. This explanation reveals that Bumpy understood his actions in strategic, systemic terms rather than personal ones. He wasn't responding to individual insult. He was maintaining infrastructure of respect that made his operations, and by extension, Harlem's informal order, functional. The lasting impact, how one evening defined decades. The Wells restaurant incident became foundational story about Bumpy Johnson. Not his most complex operation, not his most strategic achievement, but his most memorable demonstration of what respect meant and how it was maintained. For the next 20 years, until Bumpy's death in 1968, people in Harlem would reference the 36 marks when discussing respect, boundaries, and consequences. The phrase became shorthand for entire philosophy about how power and authority actually worked in communities where official systems provided no protection. Young people growing up in Harlem learned the story as moral lesson about choice and consequence. Old people told it to explain how Bumpy had maintained authority for so long without constant challenges and conflicts. Business people understood it as explanation for why Bumpy's word was respected and his boundaries were observed. The story also spread beyond Harlem. Other communities heard variations. Other operators understood the message. Bumpy Johnson had demonstrated something that transcended just one incident. He'd shown that respect maintained through demonstrated consequences was more effective than respect claimed through reputation alone. When Bumpy died in 1968, his obituary in the Amsterdam News mentioned his decades of operations, his conflicts with Dutch Schultz, his time in Alcatraz. But people attending his funeral talked more about stories like Wells' Restaurant, about moments when Bumpy had demonstrated who he was through actions that became legend. And the 36 witnesses, those people who'd been in the restaurant that March evening, carried the story forward, told it to children and grandchildren, ensured that the lesson was preserved even as the specific details became less clear, even as variations multiplied, even as time passed and the original participants passed on. The story became part of Harlem's oral history, not documented in official records, not recorded in police files beyond perfunctory assault report, but preserved in memory, in retellings, in the cultural knowledge that communities pass down about how power actually works, how respect is maintained, how boundaries are enforced, when official systems provide no justice and no protection. The final truth. What happened outside Wells' Restaurant on March 23, 1948, was witnessed by 56 people, 36 inside the restaurant, approximately 20 on the street. 0 cooperated with police. 0 provided testimony. 0 violated the codes that governed their community. Ulysses Rawlins lost his left eye and gained 36 permanent scars, one for each witness inside the restaurant who watched him make the fatal mistake of disrespecting someone who'd earned respect through decades of maintaining it. Bumpy Johnson demonstrated that respect wasn't abstract concept, but concrete reality, enforced through immediate, severe public consequences. And everyone who witnessed it, directly or through the stories that spread afterward, understood the lesson, that some men command genuine authority that can't be challenged without paying price, that's immediate, severe, and permanent. The confrontation lasted 4 minutes. The lesson lasted 50 years. And the number, 36, became legend that mothers told children, that elders told youth, that communities passed down as reminder about respect, boundaries, and the absolute certainty of consequences when those boundaries are crossed by people foolish enough to believe that reputation can be challenged without cost. That was March 23, 1948, the evening when Ulysses Rawlins learned what every wise person in Harlem already knew, and when everyone watching learned that Bumpy Johnson's respect wasn't something you could challenge without accepting consequences you'd carry visibly for the rest of your life.